Once two strangers climbed a rocky top looking for a moonshine.
In 1958, a 22-year-old country star arrived in London with a shocking companion that ended his career overnight. She was 13 years old and happened to be his cousin. But child marriages were just the beginning of country music's most twisted scandals. One star set an award on fire during live television. Another compared a president to Hitler and lost millions. From bigamy to racism, these legends hid behind their guitars while destroying lives. The industry covered it up for decades, but the truth always finds a way out. Spade Cooley. At the height of his fame, Spade Cooley was known as the king of Western swing. He filled ballrooms that seated thousands and even rivaled Bob Wills in winning over post-war country fans. In Los Angeles, he ruled the nightlife. He appeared in more than 50 Western films, and his television show once captured an astonishing 75% of local viewers. Stars like Frank Sinatra and Gene Autry dropped by his set, and by 1950, Cooley had become a millionaire with his own star in Hollywood. He was even planning an amusement park he called Water Wonderland. But everything changed on April 3, 1961. That night, Cooley's paranoia and jealousy boiled over. His second wife, Ella May, was 36 and often accused by him of being unfaithful. Those accusations had become an obsession that pushed him to violence. On that evening, he forced his 14-year-old daughter, Melody, to watch as he brutally attacked Ella May. He stripped her, beat her, and tortured her in a frenzy of rage. The violence was shocking. He smashed her skull, stomped on her, broke her ribs, and left her with more than 70 separate injuries. Even after she was dead, he burned her with his cigarette to make sure she would not wake again. The house turned into a horrific crime scene. Ella May's body was discovered naked and so badly beaten that even hardened officers recoiled. The autopsy described it as murder by torture. At first, Cooley told police she had slipped in the shower, but in the courtroom, that story crumbled. Melody's testimony stunned the nation. She told how her father had called her into the room specifically so she would witness what he did to her mother. In August 1961, Cooley was sentenced to life in prison for first-degree murder by torture. Inside, he kept up a strange image of respectability. He formed a prison band and was praised as a model prisoner. After only 8 years, he was offered parole. On November 23, 1969, while out on temporary release to perform a concert for law enforcement, he received a standing ovation. Minutes later, backstage, he collapsed from a heart attack and died. His end was as shocking as his crime. He became known as the man whose story went from applause to obituary in the same evening, leaving behind a legacy not of music and fame, but of horror. Johnny Paycheck. The night Johnny Paycheck pulled the trigger inside the North High Lounge is remembered in country music for all the wrong reasons. It was December 19, 1985. He wasn't stepping off a stage or leaving a concert crowd behind. He had just slipped out of a wild party with the Hells Angels in Maryland, where the FBI was watching closely for a raid. Before leaving, he ran back into the clubhouse to grab his stash of Peruvian cocaine and 2 suitcases stuffed with cash. Wired and restless, he drove until he finally stopped at a bar in Hillsboro, Ohio, just 20 miles from home. Inside the dim lounge, he found himself with locals Lloyd and Larry Wise. Paycheck's outlaw edge mixed with paranoia, and the drugs coursing through his system didn't help. At one point, Lloyd Wise made what seemed like a harmless offer of turtle soup. Paycheck snapped. In a sudden flash of anger, he pulled out a .22 pistol and fired. The bullet grazed Wise's scalp, ripping his hat away but sparing his life. Later, in court, Wise would say, "He blowed my hat off." I guess he took it as a personal insult. The shooting made headlines everywhere. Country stars rushed to his side. George Jones and Merle Haggard posted $50,000 for his bail. Jerry Lee Lewis even played benefit shows to help cover his legal costs. Paycheck claimed he had acted in self-defense, but his story didn't hold up. He had thrown away the gun and was charged with aggravated assault and tampering with evidence. On May 16, 1986, Judge Darrell Hoddle sentenced him to 9.5 years in prison, nearly all of it mandatory under Ohio law because he had used a firearm. Paycheck stood still as the sentence came down, but the news sent shockwaves through country music. In the 2 years that followed, he received thousands of letters from fans around the world. Prison didn't strip away his spirit. He earned his high school diploma, worked as a teacher's aide, and tried to keep busy. Still, the trouble didn't end. By 1990, the IRS hit him with a $1.6 million tax bill, forcing him into bankruptcy. His reputation as an outlaw only grew stronger. People still remembered his 1977 anthem, "Take This Job and Shove It," which now felt like the story of his own life. After 22 months, Governor Richard Celeste commuted his sentence, but the scars remained. The victim never forgot the night, and Paycheck never escaped the shadow of what happened in that bar. David Allan Coe. If you want to see real chaos in country music, David Allan Coe's life is hard to top. His career didn't just cause trouble now and then. It felt like one scandal after another. Most singers in Nashville bent the rules a little. Coe seemed determined to tear them up completely. The trouble started when he was just 9 years old. He was sent in and out of reform schools and prisons, building a reputation for violence and taking part in rough talent contests behind bars. As he got older, rumors began to spread that he had killed another inmate and even spent time on death row. Official records show that never happened, but Coe didn't try to silence the story. In fact, he added to it through his own songs and on his website, letting the legend grow bigger than the truth. When he was finally released from prison for good in 1967, he didn't head straight into Nashville's good graces. Instead, he parked a hearse outside the Ryman Auditorium, playing music on the street and sometimes sleeping in the back. He eventually landed a record deal and even wrote hits for other artists, including the classic "Take This Job and Shove It." Still, he seemed to work against himself at every turn. In 1978 and again in 1982, Coe released 2 albums on his own, Nothing Sacred and Underground album. Both were filled with songs so offensive that no record label wanted to be connected with them. One track in particular, N.F., was filled with racist and homophobic slurs. The New York Times and nearly every other major outlet described his work as some of the most racist, misogynist, homophobic, and obscene songs recorded by a popular songwriter. Rather than back down, Coe leaned into the outrage. He sold the records himself, mostly through biker magazines and at concerts, charging $20 apiece years later. When asked to defend the lyrics, he called them satire and often pointed to the fact that his drummer, Kerry Brown, was black. But the damage had already been done. The albums circulated underground for decades, becoming infamous while adding to Coe's strange reputation. His troubles didn't stop there. In 2015, he admitted that he hadn't paid income taxes for at least 6 years. That mistake cost him $980,000 in IRS fines and restitution, along with 3 years of probation. To avoid having his money seized, Coe started demanding only cash for his live shows. He performed at least 100 concerts every year, while the IRS continued to chase him down. When you put all of this together, it's clear that no one in country music built a legend quite like David Allan Coe. The more shocking the story, the more he seemed to enjoy living it. Jerry Lee Lewis. When Jerry Lee Lewis burst onto the music scene, he wasn't just showing off wild energy at the piano. He was about to set the standard for scandal in both rock and country music. Nothing could prepare the world for the shock that came in May 1958. Lewis was only 22 when he landed in London for a 37-show tour. At Heathrow Airport, a reporter noticed a very young girl traveling with him. Her name was Myra Gale Brown, and she was introduced as Lewis's bride. The truth stunned everyone. Myra was not only his second cousin, but also just 13 years old, fresh out of 7th grade. To make matters worse, Lewis had not even divorced his second wife at the time. The British press went into a frenzy. Crowds booed and shouted at him until he was forced off stage. His tour collapsed after only 3 shows, leaving him with an estimated $200,000 in losses, which was an enormous sum for that time. Within days, radio stations stopped playing his music, and venues refused to book him. The headlines branded him as everything from a homewrecker to a criminal. Lewis tried to defend himself by saying that such marriages were common where he grew up in Louisiana, but that explanation could not save his career. In the United States, the backlash grew even stronger. When fans learned not only of the marriage, but also of the bigamy, they turned against the man once known as the Killer. His record sales crashed from millions to almost nothing. The scandal only deepened as more details came out. Myra was not just a young bride, but also Lewis's first cousin once removed. When the pair returned to America, the press discovered he was still legally married to his previous wife, Jane Mitchum. Even so, Lewis and Myra stayed together for 13 turbulent years. Myra later said that during that time she suffered every kind of physical and mental abuse imaginable. She described terrifying episodes of violence, often tied to Lewis's anger and heavy drinking. Despite the uproar, Lewis never slowed down. Over the years, he married 7 times. 2 of his wives died under circumstances that raised more questions than answers. Myra eventually told her story in a book, calling him a dangerous child in a man's body. Decades later, his name remains linked to chaos and scandal, the kind of infamy that most musicians could never imagine reaching. Hank Williams Jr. Nobody expected primetime football to turn into chaos until Hank Williams Jr. blew up his own career on live television. On October 3, 2011, the country star everyone called Bocephus walked onto Fox and Friends and made a remark that stunned the anchors into silence. When asked about President Obama playing a casual round of golf with House Speaker John Boehner, Hank compared it to Hitler playing golf with Netanyahu. The anchors froze as he went further, calling Obama and Biden the enemy. Within a single day, ESPN dropped his famous Monday Night Football theme song, a partnership that had been running since 1989. It ended with the suddenness of a record scratch in a noisy bar. Hank wasn't the type to apologize. While sponsors and networks scrambled, he doubled down. On his own website, he blasted ESPN, claiming he walked away by choice. He wrote that the network had stepped on the toes of the First Amendment. The clash spread quickly online, with furious fans defending him and critics calling him reckless. He even released a song called "Keep the Change," aimed at Obama and the networks, and it was downloaded more than 180,000 times in only 2 days. On The View, he said he had no regrets, and even called Mickey Mouse mean. The following year, at the Iowa State Fair, he went further in front of a huge crowd, saying America had a Muslim president who hated farming, hated the military, hated the country, and that the people hated him back. For Hank, scandal wasn't a side effect of his career. It was the fuel that kept it moving. Concerts became gatherings where Confederate flags waved proudly, with his Bocephus nickname stitched across them. His set lists often included "If the South Woulda Won" and other songs that carried threats and Southern pride. In 2015, during one sweltering summer show, fans stood in rebel flag capes as he hurled homophobic insults from the stage. Each word met with cheers that made the atmosphere even more charged. Through every storm, Hank stayed locked on his core audience. He leaned into every culture clash, always wearing the same smirk that told people he had no plans to stop. To his biggest fans, he was the outlaw king of country music. To his critics, he was the ringmaster of the loudest circus in the industry. Charlie Rich. When the Country Music Association Awards reached their peak in 1975, the crowd was ready for the most important moment of the night. The award for Entertainer of the Year was about to be announced. Charlie Rich, known as the Silver Fox, had won the title the year before, and now he stepped onto the stage again. But something felt off. He wasn't steady on his feet, and his voice carried the weight of more than nerves. He had been drinking gin and tonics all evening and was still taking painkillers for a broken foot. The audience could sense something unusual, but no one knew how strange the moment was about to become. Instead of keeping things simple, Rich wandered off course. He made awkward jokes and even flirted with Loretta Lynn, leaving some of the nominees' wives shifting uncomfortably in their seats. He rambled about the difficult year he'd just gone through and mentioned a trip to London. The tension grew as people waited for him to finally open the envelope. When he did, he pulled out a lighter and calmly set the winner's card on fire. Holding it up, he announced, "My friend, Mr. John Denver." The crowd was stunned. Gasps filled the room as the ashes fell. Denver wasn't even there to see it happen. He accepted his award by satellite from Los Angeles, unaware that his big moment had come with a burst of flames. To many, it looked like Rich was mocking Denver, a singer some felt was too polished and pop-friendly for traditional country music. The backlash was immediate. Rich was never invited back to the CMA Awards. His songs quickly slipped off the radio, and his sales fell sharply. Later, Rich's son explained that his father hadn't meant to insult Denver at all. He said it was only a joke that went terribly wrong. But the damage was done. Charlie Rich, a man who once pushed boundaries by mixing country with jazz, blues, and pop, had lit a fire that ended up burning his own career. In just one shocking moment, he created a memory country music has never forgotten. Porter Wagoner. Porter Wagoner was famous for his glittering rhinestone suits under the bright TV lights. But behind the scenes, he was even more known for the control he tried to keep. His biggest battle came with Dolly Parton, the young singer who joined his show in 1967. At first, their duets made them one of the most popular acts in Nashville. What the audience didn't see was the tension growing between them. By 1974, their partnership had become so strained that Dolly wrote, "I Will Always Love You," as her way of saying goodbye. The song was tender, but the split that followed was anything but gentle. In 1979, Wagoner sued her for $3 million, claiming she had broken their contract and owed him 15% of her future income and royalties, possibly for the rest of her career. He argued in court that he deserved the money because, in his words, he had made her a star. The legal fight lasted for months, with tabloids full of stories about betrayal and backstabbing. In the end, Dolly agreed to pay him around $1 million over several years. She later called it the price of peace and admitted that he got the first $1 million she ever earned. The struggles weren't only about money. Dolly and others close to her said Wagoner often acted like a man who wanted full control. She described him as a male chauvinist who tried to guide every part of her career and rarely accepted her independence. Even after she left, he gave bitter interviews where he claimed she was untrustworthy and said she would even turn her back on her own family if it helped her career. His words painted a picture of someone who could not stand to see her move on without him. The damage reached beyond their personal conflict. Wagoner's own career and finances began to crumble. He made poor business decisions, poured money into restaurants, and spent freely on his flashy lifestyle. By the mid-1980s, he was bankrupt and forced to auction off some of his treasured rhinestone suits that had once been a symbol of his success. It was a painful fall for a man who had once ruled the stage at the Grand Ole Opry. In the end, Porter Wagoner's legacy is remembered not only for his music, but also for the bitter clash with Dolly Parton that revealed the darker side of his career. George Jones. George Jones was one of those rare stars whose personal life sometimes outshined his music, and not always in the best way. By the late 1970s, his reputation for chaos had become almost as famous as his voice. In 1979 alone, he missed 54 concerts, earning him the nickname No-Show Jones. Fans still paid the $13.50 ticket price, which today would be about $50, even though there was no guarantee he would appear. Some came prepared to lose their money, while promoters started setting aside funds for refunds and even joked about placing bets on whether Jones would take the stage at all. His career was on the verge of collapse, and it was only the massive success of his 1980 hit, He Stopped Loving Her Today, that kept him from disappearing altogether. But Jones's antics went far beyond skipping shows. In the late 1960s, his wife Shirley tried to stop him from drinking by hiding every car key in the house before leaving. She thought she had him trapped, but under a security light outside sat the family's John Deere riding mower, with the key still in the ignition. Determined as ever, Jones climbed on and drove the mower all the way to the liquor store in Beaumont, Texas. Some say the trip was 8 miles, others insist it was 16. But either way, crawling along at just 5 miles per hour, it took him nearly 3 hours to complete the journey. Years later, he admitted nothing could stand between him and a drink. By 1982, things had taken an even darker turn. Jones had just won the Country Music Association's Male Vocalist of the Year award for the 2nd year in a row. But not long after, police pulled him over on I-65 south of Nashville. He was weaving down the highway in a Cadillac, drunk behind the wheel. On the passenger seat sat a half-empty bottle of Jack Daniels, and the license plate on the car wasn't even real. Just a piece of cardboard with Possum 3 written on it, a nod to his nickname. When a TV cameraman arrived to cover the arrest, Jones lashed out, trying to kick him before being hauled away. After failing his sobriety test, he told the officer, "I'm drunk, take me to jail." In the holding cell, he kept swinging between raising hell and laughing, the perfect picture of the storm that followed him everywhere. Even after time in rehab for alcohol and cocaine, including a hospital stay in Mississippi after a serious accident, his legend only seemed to grow. Buck Owens. Buck Owens always looked like the perfect country star. On stage, wearing his sparkling suits and flashing a big smile, he charmed millions on Hee Haw. But once the cameras turned off, the man behind the guitar was nothing like the friendly face he showed the world. People who worked with him later described an atmosphere filled with fear. In Eileen Sisk's 2010 biography, former band members said Owens would humiliate and demean anyone who crossed him. Some admitted they were terrified to even speak around him. He controlled every detail of his world, often firing or berating those who didn't meet his standards. Money was always at the center of his decisions. Even during the height of his success, when his concerts brought in millions, Owens sometimes paid his band members only $100 a week. Walking away wasn't easy either. Musicians who quit often found themselves blacklisted in Bakersfield and far beyond. Those who stayed described it as walking on eggshells, never knowing when Owens would lash out. Roy Clark, his famous co-host on Hee Haw, once admitted that working with him was like living in constant fear of the next outburst. His cruelty didn't stop at the workplace. According to testimony uncovered by Sisk, Owens was abusive in his personal life as well. Wives and girlfriends described jealous rages that turned violent, all while he continued to present himself to the public as a devoted family man. He even went as far as involving the FBI when he thought words alone weren't enough to silence rivals. Still, no one could deny his success. By the time he died in 2006, Owens had built an empire worth an estimated $100 million. He had 21 #1 hits, owned radio and television stations, invested in cattle ranches, and controlled valuable publishing rights. He was known for charging his own band for meals and stage costumes, and he prided himself on being a sharp businessman. Yet all that wealth didn't bring him peace. In his later years, he lived more and more in isolation. His son, Buddy Allen Owens, later admitted that his father's fierce independence often left him lonely as he grew older. Owens himself didn't try to hide the truth completely. In interview after interview, he confessed, "I was a bastard on wheels." His biographer put it even more bluntly, saying Owens could buy almost everything in life except a satisfied mind. Faron Young. Faron Young's story wasn't just about the songs that made him famous. It was also about a wild streak that shocked even the toughest people in Nashville. In 1972, during a concert in Clarksburg, West Virginia, a buzzing crowd watched in disbelief as Young pulled an 18-year-old fan onto the stage and spanked her. She had spat at him, and that was his way of retaliating. The act was so outrageous that he was arrested and fined $24, with 11 more in court costs. The news spread quickly, adding to a reputation that was already infamous. Young, known as the hillbilly heartthrob, wasn't just remembered for his music. He was feared for his unpredictable drunken outbursts. Waitresses, reporters, and even members of his own band sometimes ended up facing his temper. Bourbon and barbiturates often fueled his worst moments. His biographer Diane Diekman once described a night when he urinated all over a hotel hallway carpet, laughing as he claimed he had christened the motel in honor of the band's tour stop. His anger sometimes turned even darker. In 1984, while drunk and furious, he fired a pistol into the ceiling of his Tennessee home. That moment marked the breaking point of his 32-year marriage. The most haunting part of his story came in December 1996. Alone, depressed, and weakened by cancer and emphysema, Young felt abandoned by the Nashville industry he had once helped shape. One morning, he picked up a .38 revolver and shot himself. He didn't die right away. A longtime bandmate found him alive in bed, but he passed away the next day at Summit Medical Center at the age of 64. His suicide note was brief and devastating. He blamed his failing health and what he called the decline of his career. He made it clear that he believed the industry had left him behind. After his death, his ashes were scattered over Old Hickory Lake at the home of Johnny and June Carter Cash, leaving behind one final link to the rebellious spirit of classic country.